Hi, this is Milo for bestpokercoaching.com, and today we're going to talk about 3betting for pure value. Now, as you see, I start with this chart. I made this using Flopzilla, a combination of Flopzilla, PokerStove, thinking logically, mathematics, and living and talking with Gordon. Gordon is a good friend of mine, so we talk a lot about poker strategy, and this is my chart for 3betting for pure value. As you can see, I split it up. There is a section for people who raise 100%, so versus a player who raises 100%, and versus a player who raises 50%. So I will always raise these hands, like always 3bet these hands. Now, a lot of players, they fall in between the category of like 100% or 50%, and you can probably make something up yourself, get somewhere in between. Well, you can see this is about half the size, like about 9%, and this is about 22%. So make something up yourself. If you have somebody who raises like about 70% or 80%, you can figure out approximately which hands you can 3bet. All I'm saying is these are the hands I would always 3bet. For example, this is what I would always 3bet against a 100% pre-flop raiser. By the way, I will provide these charts to download for free on the course if you sign up at bestpokercoaching.com. So let's take a look at a very simple example. Our villain makes it 30 and we have ace-8 suited, so we make it 100. His full to 3bet is 40. So, which is kind of on the low side, even though the sample size is kind of small. His steal is almost 100%, like 87. So we can pretty much use this category, like the 100%. As you can see, ace-8 suited is in there. So how big are we going to make it? Well, 100 is just fine, like about 10 big blinds. Now, in general, I try to make it a little bit bigger sometimes with offsuited hands like ace-jack offsuited or king-queen offsuited. Maybe I would make it 110, or if they would make it 20, I would make it 90 instead of 80 or 70. And the reason why I do that is that I don't really like to see a flop that much with an offsuited hand, as much as I would like to see a flop with a hand like ace-8 suited or aces or kings. So I tend to make ace-8 suited or aces or kings a little bit smaller. I think 90 would have been fine here. But then again, his full to 3bet is pretty low, so that is a point which makes us want to raise a little bit bigger because we just simply get value. Now, just to play the hand through, he makes a 4-bet of 220. It's 12 big blinds to call for us. It's a pretty easy call. I see a lot of people actually fold here, and I don't know why, because you get really good odds. Even if the guy has kings or queens, we still have very, very good equity against those hands. And people tend to do a lot of stupid stuff in 4-betted pots, as I will show you later. I think this is a regular, even though I don't have many hands on him. He doesn't seem to be that retarded, based on his pre-flop statistics. Anyway, so you flop top pair, which means in a 4-betted pot we always go broke for 100 big blinds. So what do we do now? There is no point in betting. So he makes a continuation bet. So he actually has a gut shot with a jack, and we just push because we might be able to represent a draw, or you can call as well, but calling looks so strong as well in a 4-betted pot that I thought that pushing would be better here. Maybe I would represent some weak pair or something. Anyway, he might have thought that a king or a queen would be an out for him as well if I would, for example, have a 10 or something. So he decided to call. He's not even committed to it against an ace, but he's calling anyway. I think it was probably better of him to check behind, but hindsight is, the Americans have a saying for that, hindsight is 11 something. I don't know. Anyway, he calls and we win the hand. So here's another example of a hand where I 3bet. Somebody bets 20, 2x, and I make it 70. As you can see, queen 3 suited, queen 3 suited is not in my 3-bet range. So why do I still 3-bet the guy? Well, his fold to 3-bet is really high. As you can see, it's 66%. And why is that too high? Well, I want to show this, especially the mathematics, because in another video we will get back to this. But it's interesting mathematics anyway. So, well, let me get rid of this. Here is a simple EV calculation. The direct expected value of our 3-bet, not even taking into account post-flop play, but just the pre-flop play. Well, it's like the dead money times the times that he folds to a 3-bet minus what we could lose, like our 3-bet size times the times that we actually lose, so getting called or raised. And as you can see, it works out. Well, you can do the mathematics yourself. I don't want to bore you too much with it. Here you can see a table which I made. In this scenario, in our hand, the guy was 2-betting 20, we made it 70, so their full to 3-bet break-even point is 70%, as you can see in this table. So what does this mean? Well, even if we would not make a single dollar post-flop, we would still be making money in the long term by 3-betting him if his full to 3-bet is 70% or higher. Now let's go back to the hand. Now, as you can see, his 3-bet, full to 3-bet is 66%, which is almost 70. So we only need to win post-flop a very tiny amount of the time on average to make our play profitable. In theory, against this guy, we could even 3-bet any hand, because even with a hand like 3 deuce offsuited, we will still hit trips or full house quads or a straight once every while, enough to make up for the lack of the 4%. Or, you know, we can bluff him off on a very dry board. So which other guys can we 3-bet 100%? Well, in general, my rule of thumb is if their 3-bet is higher than around 60%, I start 3-betting pretty much. I mean, I can theoretically 3-bet every hand. However, I don't do that because even the most retarded regulars will at some point realize pretty quickly that if you 3-bet every single hand in a row, that you cannot have a very good hand. So what do? I stick to about the top 50% of my hands. And how do I determine those 50% of my hands? Well, I made a chart for that. Or actually, I use a chart which I made for another reason, which I'll show in the next video. Here is the chart. This is about 43% of hand. This is actually, I made this chart for defending against 3-betters, but it actually works very well when 3-betting when you want to 3-bet somebody light as well, because these hands tend to do pretty well in 3-betted pots. So as you can see, all the blue hands represent 43% of all possible hand combinations, and I think you can even add a little bit more depending on the player. You could add some more suited hands and maybe some Queen 8, Jack 8, maybe some more kings, so that you get to about 50%. In general, I like to 3-bet 50% of the hand approximately, because for some reason I find that people will adjust very quickly if you 3-bet them 100% of hands. I mean, it's so obvious. And if you 3-bet them 50% of hands, sometimes I can get away with it for like an entire hour, like a session of an hour, and people will just not get it, and I will just pound on them, and I will take a lot of their money. One other thing I recommend is making a color range for your fold to 3-bet at around 60% for heads-up players, so that you can immediately recognize the players who are exploitable. Then another stat I really highly recommend is called the fold to flop continuation bet in 3-betted pots. And it's almost exactly the same as the fold to flop continuation bet, except that it only goes for 3-betted pots. And in the past I used to use the normal fold to flop continuation bet as an estimation of how they would react in 3-betted pots. However, when I started using both simultaneously, I realized that the stats differ a lot for many players, which means that a lot of people, they play very differently in re-raise pots than in single raise pots. And in the next hand I'll show you how we can exploit that, and also how we can use that in determining whether we want to 3-bet somebody pre-flop or not. So in this example, our opponent has a fold to 3-bet of 52%, which is not extremely high, so there's no really need to 3-bet him with 10-6 suited. However, his fold to continuation bets in re-raise spot is 67%, as you can see here. The 52% is his normal fold to continuation bet, and then after the bracket I put the fold to continuation bet in re-raise spots. So what I figure is when I 3-bet with a hand like 10-6 suited, he will fold so much post flop that even though he does not fold enough to make it immediately profitable, I will take a lot of big pots down post flop. The other thing to notice when I consider 3-betting is his 4-bet. It's 6%. His range of 4-betting. It's not extremely high, but it's important as well because if it's really high, you cannot see a flop. So those are the stats I look at as well when I decide to 4-bet. So both his fold to 3-bet, his 4-bet range, and especially his fold to continuation bet in re-raise spots. So he calls, and we get to see a flop, and it's a good flop to continuation bet. King high, no draws, except for maybe 5-6, but it's just not likely he has that. So how much are we going to continuation bet? Well, half the pot size is enough, and he folds, which is exactly what our strategy was. Like, we 3-bet a lot pre-flop, and because we can do that because he folds so much post-flop. This was Milo for bestpokercoaching.com. Now use my advice and go and follow Milo.